You have a choice whether or not you want to do this extra little corner, which is going to give it more of a boxy look. For this one, I'll just do the standard square corners. So I'll just cut just outside this line. If you're going to be sewing by hand, you'll tape this right down along that edge and punch all these holes. If you're sewing by machine, I like to sew this by machine too, so I'll still do that, and I'll tape this right down on that edge. And then you can run this through the machine along these lines, and then that will rip and peel out from in between there. The other option, if you're not going to do that or you have a different method, just cut this out right on the line and you can use this as a tracing pattern. When I do that, I usually go 2 layers of tape, one on the front and back, just to give this some rigidity. You can also spray a little adhesive and put this on a piece of tag board or something. And I have a YouTube video separate showing how to do all that if you want to reuse your pattern a few times. I do like to also go over all of these holes with tape. It just helps keep the paper from stretching and moving around on me. If you punch these holes and are going to sew this by hand, the only thing really to make sure you don't do is over tighten these stitches. You want to get them just snug enough so that these stitches are straight and look good. And you can check on the back side to make sure there's no kinks that leave a loop. But I'll start right in the center of a hole here. And then what I'm looking at is either the next hole or right in between the two, and I try to make sure that's going to line up straight with where I want the stitches to go. And for these real tight turns, sometimes it's good to just go by hand and take a look and make sure you're hitting right where you want to hit. When the needle starts to come back up, but while it's still in the leather, you can pop that foot up and turn this to align that next stitch. You can just go by hand around the tight corners here to make sure you keep everything lined up nice. Once you get around that tight corner, you can start just running the machine. Just make sure these dots are flowing right into that needle. And instead of back stitching, pop this up and cut this so you know you'll have enough thread to pull it to the back side and tie it off. When you have a lot of stitch lines that are going to cross one another, I like to try to hit, especially when I start to get close to that, hit every dot right on the nose. So I'll just pause it, make sure I'm hitting the dot. That way all the stitches will meet up nicely. So after you get a couple, you might have a lot of this going on. You can tie them off on the back before you continue, just to make sure there's not too much going on in the front there and getting tangled up and knotting up on you. If you just pull that other one to the back side, that stitch will finish right onto the last hole nicely. I'll put just a little dab of glue right here. Doesn't take a whole lot, because I like to go over the back side after this is completely done with an iron-on interfacing. It just holds all the stitches down, and if you happen to make a mistake or something, it will help just hold everything in place for you. But I'll leave just a little bit of slack on the end of that. Maybe tap that with a mallet to flatten it down. Once the sewing is all done, just cut this out. Sometimes I'll throw this off the end of a table so it stays nice and flat while I cut it. And to tear the paper off, just be real careful. You put your finger down or something to kind of help, and you can cut in with scissors. Careful with the scissors too, you could scratch this as you're cutting underneath here. to rip away from the stitches while you're holding it, so it's the paper that's ripping and not the stitches creating the tension to rip it. But you may still get a little bit of thread that gets pulled up, and if you just kind of run this across some of the stitches, you can even that out. When you're doing the 3-paneled version here, you'll notice one piece, the center piece, has 2 rows of holes. This one has 3. We're going to go with that second row of holes. It's about 3/8 inch from the edge here. And that's how we're going to sew these 2 parts together. And then we're going to fold that red one over. You got to make sure you pull them snug without bunching this stuff up very much. If your leather or material is real thin, it's going to be harder to keep it from bunching up too much. That's why I suggest at least a 3/4 ounce leather. If it's bunching up a little bit, you can pull this just to lock those stitches in. Just don't overly do it. And it's going to be the larger section that's going to fold over so that these holes will match right through those holes. Get that nice top stitch. And it can be helpful to press this fold down before you start sewing. You always come through the back first. That way any leather that gets pulled through will get pulled and tucked back in from the front side. But another thing I do when I'm coming through, I get that needle lined up through the holes, pinch it real close to that hole so everything stays lined up. So when you come back with this needle, you'll be able to go right back through without having to fight it. If I'm going to be doing that center panel with some rabbit fur or something, I'll tape this down just enough to hold it in place. Just cut a couple parts out so you have somewhere to tape this down here. Just put a couple pieces of tape right in those openings. Stay away from the holes you punched, and the edges, I'll just help hold it so I don't have to fight it. I'm going to trace around it. You're going to use a marker to go into each one of these stitching holes. I just did the dots on one side. I'm going to do the other side on a machine to show you how to do that also. The trick to cutting fur is having the bottom part of those scissors flush against the skin. You'll still want to grab the excess fur on these edges, otherwise it's just going to float everywhere on you. Since I backed this with canvas, I'm just going to leave the holes marked because I can just press the needle through. If you backed it with leather, you're going to want to slide this up to the edge of a punch board to get that fur out of the way as much as possible, and then punch these holes out with that fur pressed out of the way. Get the holes lined up as best you can, and use a needle or something to press the fur out of the way. And look at where these holes are and line all these up. This panel has 3 lines of holes. We're going to be sewing the one that's about 3/8 inch in. It's this middle one on that panel. And this panel only has the 2, so it's the back one. With that first line of stitches in there, I'm going to use a white thread now because of the black leather. Have a nice looking top stitch. Whatever fabric you're using in the middle isn't going to fold over. It's going to be the outside part. It's going to fold right at that seam. The method's pretty much the same if you're going to run this through on a sewing machine. Just clip it, get the fur out of the way. First stitch line here is going to be about 3/8 inch in. Make that crease right at the first stitch line there. And we should be able to hit this while going through these layers. So So when I start sewing like this corner or the two panels together, if you're skipping this corner, regardless hand or machine stitching, when I do the two parts together, I like to try to match the thread to the leather itself or the fabric. That way the stitches aren't showing as much. I know it's easy to just go red if you're stitching with that same thread, but it'll look a lot better if you can try to match this secondary thread with the leather. To sew these cut corners, if you're hand sewing it, just fold it over, and it can be helpful to put a little clip or something right here. You want to pull these tight without bunching this up too much. A little bit's okay, because then when you stretch it, it'll just lock those stitches in. Just make sure to give it a little tug with each stitch. And sometimes it's hard to find the hole. So once you get it, if you pinch real close to that needle, this next one will follow it right back. You can see that last hole gets real close to the edge. I'll just go to that last hole and come back. I don't bother going around. Just get real close up to this edge. You don't have to go over it. Once you have both of these parts done, I'll flip one of them out so that it sits into the other one. And you have a couple options with these corners. You can go opposite directions and do that all the way around, or you can grab the two top sections or the sides and have both seams on one side going one way and the other one the other way, so that it looks a little bit more uniform. And what I'll do is just match up one corner at a time and throw a clip on it, or a couple clips. So this one, the inside part, both seam allowances go this way, so I'll just make sure to do the same on this side. Once I get that, throw a couple clips across each length here. Whether I have all the holes punched for the hand sewn version or I'm doing it on a machine, I'll mark about 6 3/4 inch or so I have an open space. And what I'll do on the machine is I'll start on one side, go all the way around, I'll back stitch to lock it, but I'll still sew across here and strip those stitches. That way I have all the holes so I can blind stitch it after I flip it right side out. You do have to be careful. Sometimes this will fold over the edge and stick on that corner or something, so as you're sewing it'll pull this out of alignment. Once you get to the corner, you're going to want to kind of stand it up a little bit. Make sure that's folded under there. And you may need to go slow and even by hand to get it up on that ledge if this is even thicker leather. Just follow that seam allowance. And you can see what I do to mark a seam allowance is I'll put a piece of tape at a point directly across from the needle. That way you can tell exactly where you are if you're going over it too much, and you know exactly straight across from where the needle is where you'll need to line it up. Same thing as before, I just hold that down and you'll notice if you can feel there's something wrong underneath. Make sure all these layers are on the side you want them on. But this corner is curved just slightly as you come around it, just because of the fold. So it's almost like a little arc. I went all the way around, and now on that other mark, I'll backstitch to lock it, but I'm just going to continue all the way across here, keeping that seam allowance I'm not going to back stitch right here, no need to. I'm just going to strip these stitches out anyway. You can see where it's back stitched here and here, and I'll go in between those two. And I'll just use a hand stitching thread to finish this off after we get some stuffing in here. I like to try to get it packed pretty tight, but feel for density, make sure it's pretty even. I like to finish these off by hand, and I just tied a little knot at the end. This will hide these stitches. You go in and then come back out the next hole. And just take your time. Then I'll go in the hole straight across and then come out the next hole. I'll just keep doing that back and forth. And you don't have to tighten the stitches right off the bat. You can do that after you get down. And you'll see that'll just hide those stitches. And if you didn't tighten it as you went, like I'm doing, I'll go a couple stitches ahead, pull this through. Once I get close to snug, I'll make sure that's folded down in there nicely and give it a snug. It starts to get hard at the end, so I'll try to push this up so I can see the holes on the edge there. If you're a little unsure you're not, you can put a little glue in there when you push it in. But I like to stretch this out a little, make sure it looks uniform. And leather, since air doesn't go through it very well, this will have like a suctioning effect. If you don't want that, you can put a couple like hole punches on the back part. And they sell little grommets and stuff you could even get if you wanted, but I don't mind that. It just takes a minute for it to fluff back out. Just got to even out the filling a little bit and this one will be done.